Hello, how's it going? I see Pavlovich. Hello, good morning. All right. So today we're going to look at this mysterious thing, an obscure topic called capitalism. You may have heard of it. We'll wait for some of you to join here. Oh, Joe Scott just released a new video 3 minutes ago. Man, you could be early to that one. Here, I'm gonna. Here, let's be the early crew for the Joe Scott's new
The
video.
cities of Tucson, Arizona.
I've made videos about, well, at least one whole video about the metric system. First, even though I'm 23rd. Oh, 24th. There we go. I'll have to watch that later. Thanks for being here. When am I going to do the gym stream? I posted gym video on Instagram and Twitter, I think. I was kind of poking fun at Marjorie Taylor Greene on how to do pull-ups. Oh yeah, good morning, Cool Banana 69. The first human is here. Whoa, the very first human. Thank you for being here. Good to see you. AJ Singh H. Good morning. Yeah, I think I'm going to make a video about the Iraq War and also the war in Iraq. Two separate wars related, of course. Probably will be two separate videos. Not sure when yet, though, but oh, got a frog in my throat. Mr. Beat does the Iraq War, yeah. All right, I think we've got a few people here. We'll go ahead and get started. So the video today that I'm going to react to is by a YouTuber I normally enjoy. I guess I should have cleared my throat before I went live. Sorry. Sabine Hassenfelder is her name. She's a mysterious cat. I might try to see if I can interview her for my podcast, my 10 Questions podcast. But I think by like her specialization, her specialty, I believe is she's a physicist. But she covers a wide range of scientific topics on her YouTube channel, and she has a team that helps her. She's German. Okay, her field is quantum gravity specifically. So she's a theoretical physicist. Seems to be, she's older than I am. Okay, I assume she's about my age. She's from Frankfurt. I just Googled this and I'm finding these things out. She has a Wikipedia page. Man, most YouTubers don't have Wikipedia pages. We kind of get. I was really bummed when I found out that somebody tried to start a Wikipedia page for me and it got rejected several times. And I guess I don't know why. I guess I'm not big enough yet. Maybe when I have 1 million subscribers someday. Oh, she has 1 million subscribers. Interesting. Oh, let me share it with the screen I'm looking at here. Yeah, that would help. This is Sabine Hassenfelder. Yeah, I watch her videos regularly, but she just released a video, well, I guess this was about 2 weeks ago, about capitalism. She normally does not release videos about economics. So out of her comfort zone. And apparently, like if you just look at the video, a lot of her regular viewers just trash it. They're talking a lot of trash about the video, saying you need to go back to science. Although technically economics is a science, it's one of these social sciences, a soft science, if you will. So it's not a perfect science. It's vulnerable to subjective interpretations often, like any of the social sciences. She also, by the way, dipped her toes into social sciences a few months back, and also it was just as controversial. She made a video about transgenderism, which maybe I'll react to that some other time. But I already watched it, so I'm kind of it's not the same if I've already watched it. I have not watched her economics video yet, so this is going to be my first reaction to it. But apparently, a lot of people hate this video. It's been very controversial. I think some people have defended it. You already probably know that I think capitalism is a net positive. Obviously, it has some issues. Capitalism has major issues, but oh, did I mispronounce her name? Sabina. Oh, Sabina. Okay, see, way to start the stream horribly by mispronouncing her name. Sabina Hassenfelder. Sabina Hassenfelder. What am I sipping on? Oh, I'm always sipping on cold brew. That's what I drink in the morning. I'm 41 years old, so yeah. I don't know the details on that, so I'm sorry. So you've already seen it. You didn't like it either. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that. Heck yeah, Cool Banana knows about cold brew. So here is the video. The title, I mean, right off the bat, it's a spicy title. Capitalism is good. Let me explain. So if you just scroll down, and as you can see, oh, I'm not subscribed to her? I think I might have unsubscribed after the transgenderism video because I didn't like how she was both sidesing it. She was trying to I think reel in the Matt Walsh fans. Not Matt Walsh, the comedian, but Matt Walsh, the conservative pundit. Anyway, I'll subscribe to her again. I forgot that I unsubscribed. Maybe that was on my personal account that I subscribed to her. Anyway, I do watch her videos regularly, so I'm very familiar, even though I apparently don't know how to pronounce her name. Sabina Hassenfelder. So just a little sample here. I'll zoom in a little bit on the comments. Look at this. This video has been useful. The amount of rebuttal videos to it have been quite illuminating. There's so many reaction videos to this video already. I remember when Dr. Sabina scolded and other scientists for stepping out of their expertise and talk nonsense. As an economist myself, I have to say, I really like your physics videos. Maybe keep making those. Ha! Snap! Ooh, 1,100 likes to that. We just need to use capitalism the right way is the same argument as just one more lane that will fix traffic, I promise. Sabina 600 years ago. But for today, feudalism has been incredibly successful in advancing society. Okay, so, and then finally, this video was a shock. I watch every video Sabina releases. This is the first time I've seen her do many things, such as one, abandoned topics she actually knows about. I would argue she doesn't really know much about most topics. I don't either. She specializes in quantum gravity. That's what she knows. But she has for a long time just released general science videos trying to, approaching a wide array of different topics in a scientifically minded way. Anyway, abandoned topics she usually knows about. She's already done that. Number 2, make a video without doing any relevant research. Ooh, I wonder if she cites her sources in this one. And 3, blindly spew an almost religious level of dogmatic propaganda. Wow. Okay, so without further ado, let's just get into this before I get too biased myself. Although, again, I like to defend capitalism myself. I've been called a nasty neoliberal many times in my life, quite frequently in recent years. So that said, unfettered capitalism obviously is not good. And, I think I generally prefer what the Nordic countries do in terms of capitalism. They have, mixed economies there, and their public goods, I think I agree with them for the most part. Maybe I should pull up my I wonder how she's going to define capitalism, because that's always kind of the root of the problem. She's probably going to screw up the definition, so maybe we should pull up my my definition of capitalism from my capitalism, socialism, communism video. It's hard to define these words. Yeah. All right, let's go ahead and start this video.
Capitalism will kill us all. That is, if you trust Greta Thunberg, which maybe you should not.
Ooh.
Free markets will save us all, if you trust Robert F.
Starting out the video with Greta Thunberg is interesting.
Kennedy Jr., which maybe you should not. Maybe we should.
Robert RFK Jr., like, it's interesting to begin the video off this way.
Capitalism will kill us all. That is, if you trust Greta Thunberg, which maybe you should not. Free markets will save us all, if you trust Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which maybe you should not.
He's actually, I didn't know he said that. He's very, I mean, he's running for the Democratic nomination. He's perfectly fine with government intervention into markets. So
maybe we should talk about what capitalism and free markets are.
Yeah.
Will they kill us or save us? That's what we'll talk about today. Before we talk about capitalism and markets and stuff, we need to talk about money. I don't mean my money, though while we're at it, check out my Patreon. I mean money in general. What do we even need money for? Suppose you have an apple, but you'd rather have an egg. You ask your friend Sue, the one with the chickens, and trade an egg for an apple. Okay, but what if Sue doesn't want an apple? She'd rather have a banana. No problem. You ask your friend Joe with the bananas if he will trade your apple for a banana.
What's going on here with that picture? Why would they do that?
Rather have a banana. No problem. You ask your friend Joe with the banana.
What's going on? They put the banana right there? What were you thinking? Maybe they did it on purpose. Well, come on now.
Bananas if he will trade your apple for a banana. Then you trade the banana for Sue's egg. Okay, but what if Joe doesn't want an apple either? He'd rather have new shoelaces. No problem. You ask your friend Mary if she'll take an apple for shoelaces. Give the shoelaces to Joe, take the banana, give the banana to Sue, and sure enough, you have your egg. It works, but honestly, that seems a little cumbersome.
That's kind of like an oversimplified way to describe bartering, which I used to, when I taught economics, I kind of said something similar to that. Obviously, it's never that simple, but yeah, that's before we created money, which is a completely human-made thing. We made it up. Remember that.
How about we instead trade something that everyone will accept because they can exchange it for something else later?
Yes.
Like gold, maybe. I give some gold to Sue and she gives me an egg. Then she can take the gold and give it to Joe and get her a banana. That's much easier. Hooray, we just invented commodity money.
Hooray!
All right, but now imagine you don't want to buy an egg, but an entire chicken farm. That would be a lot of gold you'd have to wheel around. So how about we instead, I don't know, print the face of a king onto a piece of gold and say it stands for an entire cart of gold? Come to think of it, why bother with gold? Let's just print it on a piece of paper.
Fiat currency.
The paper itself doesn't have much of a value, but if we all agree on what it stands for, we can use it for trade. Hooray, we just invented token money. That sounds great, but the
token money, also known as fiat currency. So far, the explanation has been perfectly fine. I see no problems whatsoever. So I imagine the controversial stuff comes later. Somebody asked me, oh, first of all, yes, I have a brother. And the worst ideology, in my opinion, is fascism. I hate fascism. Yeah, well put. Well put. Okay. Little teaser for what's to come, I assume, then. All right, let's continue.
problem is if a lot of vendors just refuse to accept the money, it stops working. So in reality, token money is backed up by a king or a government, which enforces that vendors accept the money as payment. It's then called fiat money. Almost all money we use today is fiat money, except cryptocurrencies, but that's another story. Fiat money is fascinating because it's ultimately still based on trust. If all you guys watching this video freak out, exchange your entire US dollars for euro, and tell your friends to do the same, the US dollar would collapse. So don't do it.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so far, no problems at all. The token money thing versus fiat, I mean, it's all really the same. It's just whether fiat currency, yeah, she's saying that exists because you have a government that backs it up. Yeah, keep in mind we didn't really have a pure fiat money system until the 1970s when we went off the gold standard, and most of the world that was a similar situation actually. So fiat money is a relatively new thing.
Several economists have argued that any community of sufficiently intelligent traders will eventually introduce a type of token money because it's the most efficient way to distribute resources. This idea was maybe first clearly formulated by the Scottish economist Adam Smith. All right, so we have money, but our busy traders still have a problem. Suppose you have a lot of apples and not sufficiently many people to buy them. Your amazing apples rot away. What a shame. You would like to make apple juice from them, but you can't afford a juice press, so your breakthrough innovation doesn't come into being. That sucks. However, your friend Sue has been getting really rich with all her chickens. So rich, in fact, she's sitting on a big pile of money that she doesn't know what to do with. Sue sees your problem and offers you a deal. She gives you some of her money so that you can buy your juice press. You just have to agree that if you get rich with your juice press, you give her the money back plus something on top.
That's usually not how capital investment begins, at least for hundreds of years. So maybe like in the, I would say, pre-industrial age, maybe something like this could have been possible, although that would have been something, probably more likely than not a situation without fiat currency. You would have gold coins or something. But chicken farmer, she made a killing as a chicken farmer? No. I mean, the vast majority of farmers throughout almost all of human history were subsistence farmers. The only change we saw with farming in terms of profits that were ridiculous enough to invest in other stuff have been happening the last 150 years. Again, post-industrial revolution, because it just didn't make sense for farmers to, I mean, they consumed what they produced, and it was hard for them to get ahead because there were so many variables, and farming is just really difficult. Today we see huge corporations that have invested and manage farms across the whole entire planet. But that's a very new thing. So in terms of capital investment, typically we're talking about investment firms, hedge funds, private equity firms, or banks. Traditionally, it's been banks, commercial banks. And how do banks get money? Well, they start out by loaning money, and they get interest on that money that they loaned out. So when we talk about investment and investment in capital, oftentimes it starts with finance. It doesn't start with a chicken farmer. So that's an interesting way. But she's simpling it. She's making it simple here for folks to understand. So we can let that slide.
Money which Sue gives to you is your capital. And such was born the capitalist. The capitalist is a person or institution who provides capital to those who want to launch a new business, someone who's able and willing to take the risk that this capital will never have a return on investment. Today, we grow up with money and banks and all that, and we tend to take them for granted. And while money lending and a basic notion of financial debt date back thousands of years, capitalism and all the elaborate financial instruments that come with it is a surprisingly recent innovation. It didn't really take off until the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago, and it's dramatically changed the world. Scientists tend to associate the stunning societal progress we've seen since then to science and technology. But I think that's having it backwards. The driver of all this progress was the capitalist system that allowed an efficient allocation of resources. By resources, I don't just mean raw materials, but also goods and human resources. Capitalism is a system that distributes these resources without anyone needing to have an overview, just by interactions between traders. It's pure genius if you think about it. And that's why science took off, not the other way around. Remember that story about how the Scottish physician Alexander Fleming supposedly accidentally discovered penicillin in 1928 and saved the lives of countless wounded soldiers in World War II? Yeah, well, that isn't really what happened. First of all, scientists had discovered that the fungus penicillium inhibits the growth of bacteria decades earlier. It just wasn't widely known. The British psychologist Burton Sanderson, for example, observed this in 1870 and wrote a book about it. There are also several other written documentations from other people around that time who had studied the effects of fungi on bacteria.
I'm sorry, she didn't really define what capitalism is. So I mean, she kind of did, but not really. So my definition of capitalism is it's basically an economic system. So when we say economic system, it's how goods and services get around, and it's characterized by private or corporate. There's a distinction there. Ownership. So characterized by private or corporate ownership of um, goods and services. Um, and when we talk about specifically capital goods, which she didn't mention capital goods are goods used to make other goods. So another important distinction. It just seems like she didn't properly define capitalism, or she kind of glossed it over. When I think that's at the heart of this, because when we talk about capitalism, the whole point of the whole reason why private and corporate ownership works. So the best example we have, private property, is the fact that it's implied that there are always incentives to acquire more property, and it's all guided by private decisions by producers and consumers. And if you want to make money, then you have to invest in capital goods, which is taking a risk, but it rewards that risk sometimes. Oftentimes, it does not reward the risk. And there's lots of failure within capitalism, but that's just how it goes. But the idea is that these motivations drive everything and keep the engine moving and keep the wheels turning, for lack of a better metaphor. So it seems like she kind of glossed over the definition of capitalism, and I think that's probably the first red flag I see of this video. Sounds like a PragerU presentation. Kinda, yeah. And the penicillin example here is kind of throwing me off, because when I'm thinking about penicillin, I'm thinking about what was the doctor's name that she mentioned? I don't even know. I mean, there were several doctors that I think that developed penicillin, but I think, or at least not developed it, but they recognized its benefits, and I'm just a little confused on how she's connecting it to capitalism. So I'll let her finish here. In fact, I'm going to rewind a little bit here just to kind of make sure I get the full context. But yeah, it doesn't seem like she adequately defined capitalism.
Soldiers in World War II? Yeah, well, that isn't really what happened.
Oh,
First of all, scientists had
Alexander Fleming. He was he was the one who discovered it. Okay. Well, I mean, he was a. Didn't he work at a university, which is publicly funded? He discovered it as at a publicly funded, or maybe it was a private university. Okay, a private university. I don't even know what university it was. Anyway, let's hear her out. Okay, come on.
Discovered that the fungus penicillium inhibits the growth of bacteria decades earlier. It just wasn't widely known. The British psychologist Burton Sanderson, for example, observed this in 1870 and wrote a book about it. There are also several other written documentations from other people around that time who had studied the effects of fungi on bacteria. Fleming's contribution was that he realized the fungus was shedding a particular substance which he called penicillin, but he pretty much left it at naming the stuff. It wasn't until 10 years later that a group at the University of Oxford set out to find a way to grow the fungus and extract penicillin in large quantities. They then conducted medical trials, and once they were sure penicillin was both safe and effective, their method was scaled up by the pharmaceutical industry. Two members of the Oxford group later shared the Nobel Prize with Fleming. So what saved all those many lives wasn't just Fleming's observation in a petri dish. The game changer was producing the stuff in large quantities and bringing it where it was needed. Innovation and industrialization ultimately going back to capitalism. That's what saved all those people. Fleming's observation in a petri dish. The game changer was producing the stuff in large quantities and bringing it where it was needed.
Yeah, but what motivated them is important. So, I mean, I think you can't talk about capitalism without talking about motivations. Their motivations, if their motivations are to save as many lives as possible, which I assume that's the doctors at Oxford, that was their motivations. By the way, I went to Oxford a few months ago. What a cool place. But yeah, I mean, she's kind of connecting two things that I wasn't I mean, there's plenty of other better examples you could connect capitalism to make it, to convince people that, hey, capitalism is beneficial for society. In my opinion, I think the kind of the go-to thing that's easiest, that's probably the most benign, I guess, is like food. Like everybody eats. That's not controversial. Like we all like to be able to afford to eat healthy food. And so the capitalism, I would argue, was a driving force to bring food costs down. And that's, well, in fact, it got so cheap that was a problem for farmers. There was overproduction, and so they had to destroy crops and stuff. But that was a reason why at the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s, there was just like an explosion of food around the world, and world hunger became something much more rare. I mean, famine used to be just kind of a thing that happened all the time, everywhere. It could happen again. It's still happening in the world right now, in certain pockets for sure. But often capitalism is something that is good at fighting famine. If you look at all the countries that are developing right now and that are recovering from these periodic famines, usually caused by droughts or climate-related stuff, markets often present opportunities to resolve this. So yeah, the penicillin example, I think, is something. I don't know. I'm a little confused as far as why she chose penicillin as the go-to. Like, this is why capitalism is based. Okay, yeah, let me see. Let's check the comments here. This Q-Clod's got some really profound things to say. I'm going to put this up here. Yeah, I really have an issue with how she frames this. Penicillin mass production was figured out by a state-funded research facility anyway. Yeah, okay. Like many technological developments, not exactly socialism, but certainly not just thanks to markets and capitalist incentives. Okay, so yeah, that's the same thing I noticed, basically. All right, I feel better about myself.
Innovation and industrialization ultimately going back to capitalism. That's what saved all those people.
Mm,
Capitalism got a pretty bad rep when Marx claimed that it's just about grabbing hold of the means of production and exploiting the working class. Of course, there was an element of
mm.
truth to his fears.
That's not what he said. It's a bit of a straw man there. I mean, that was he said it was a byproduct. Like, let me play it again, just make sure I get this clear. I want to make sure I'm not misquoting her.
When Marx claimed that it's just about grabbing hold of the means of production and exploiting the working class.
I mean, no, like yeah, it's a byproduct of that. It can be a byproduct of that. It's not like the when you have somebody who owns the means of production, or a group of people usually that owns the means of production, the plutocrats, the oligarchy, they recognize that you got to invest in your labor force, and exploitation only gets you so far. They're not stupid. However, they'll do whatever they can to save money. And but that's why I also think unions are so important, and why worker strikes and what we're seeing right now with the auto industry, it's basically, I think, how capitalism works better, because you have labor that is demanding better treatment, and if the owners recognize that and they respond accordingly, they'll be better off. That's why I always say, like, the extremely wealthy, who are, like, so afraid of more regulations and higher taxes. um, I think they are often short-sighted, and they don't recognize that more regulations and oftentimes government stepping in makes markets more competitive, and then ultimately better for everyone, including themselves. Uh, that's the short-sightedness, I think, that often happens. But anyway, back to her point. Marx was talking about kind of like the inevitable uh, consequences, some unintended, of capitalism. So, and then people also forget that Marx and Engels, they were basically like, they were trying to predict the future. They're trying to say, this is what's going to happen based on the current trends, what we think. Here are the problems that we see happening. When we talk about Marxists or socialists or communists, that all came later. They were fans of Marx's ideas, but they kind of took them to a different level. So whenever we talk about Marx, we need to remember that, like, we just talk about what he said, and in his written works, um, before we kind of automatically associate it with what happened later on, with authoritarianism often being tied to communism.
Of course, there was an element of truth to his fears because some things went badly wrong during the Industrial Revolution, but that's another story. For today, we just need to know that capitalism, like fiat money, requires a governing institution. That's because someone must be there to
Anarcho-capitalists would say, no, it doesn't. Theoretically, you could say that no, you don't necessarily have to have a government, and that's kind of what drove a lot of this passion for cryptocurrencies, right? And she mentioned cryptocurrency, but that's a story for another video.
enforce contracts should the need arise. That and a few other things, as we'll see in a moment. There are many different ways to govern a capitalist system, and they go by different names like welfare capitalism, or laissez faire capitalism, or state capitalism. Now, one can debate how well the actions of certain governments reflect the interests of their electorate, if they were elected in the first place, but that's another story. Even so, capitalism has been enormously successful in unlocking societal progress, and the nations who still don't use it, such as North Korea, Cuba, and Laos, are places you don't want to live. We've seen that capitalism is a system that combines markets with governing rules to efficiently distribute resources.
Well, the idea, like going back to Adam Smith, the father of capitalism and really modern economics, um, the idea was that markets themselves, essentially, the rules are embedded in the markets themselves. You don't have this like government pulling the strings necessarily. It's bottom up. It's not top down. That was the markets that Adam Smith described were bottom up, completely driven by the consumer. The consumer is the boss. What we've seen is, in terms of how capitalism has evolved over the years, is that oftentimes the consumer is not the boss. The producers often run the show, and that's the issue here. And I mean, she should definitely bring this point up, because it just seems also that like she's recognizing that yes, governments have to step in and regulate things, but at the same time, capitalism doesn't start with the government or any government. It starts with consumers, and it starts with producers wanting to also consume, because producers don't just produce and that's it. We are all consumers. So it really just starts with consumers, in my view, in terms of the any kind of regulation is a reaction to what's already happening. And in my view, also, I think it's fine that governments, they're like, oh, the markets are not competitive anymore. We're going to have to step in. We got a monopoly here. We're going to have to step in. We've got regulatory capture. We've got essentially a lot of the problems I think that we see with capitalism are because governments are doing the wrong things and not doing the right things. They're often siding with producers too much and not consumers too much. That's my opinion. So let's make sure that that's clear. That's my opinion. But
distribution of resources works best if everyone can put forward their offers freely and customers can pick what they want. This is known as a free market, and it optimizes the distribution of resources by competition. Free markets are a beautiful example of decentralized self-organization, an invisible hand, as Adam Smith put it. The way it works in a nutshell is that everyone can trade around until they've got what they think is the best combination of goods, services, and financial assets. If someone doesn't use resources as efficiently as possible, some competitor can do it better and beat them off the market. This idea also goes back to Adam Smith, but later blossomed into an entire discipline now known as microeconomics. Microeconomics is all about how agents, that could be people or corporations or institutions, trade, and how that trade distributes resources where they are most needed. To be fair, microeconomics has some shortcomings when it comes to explaining how we trade in reality, but that's another story. By and large,
you said that like 4 times in this video. That's another story, which that's good too. You know, she's recognizing that, hey, this is, it's kind of hard not to oversimplify when talking about all this stuff. So at least you got to give her props for that.
Economics works fine, and several Nobel Prizes have been awarded for it. One of the most important insights to come out of this research area is that free markets only work to everyone's benefit if they're set up properly. Keep in mind that capitalism isn't just a free market, it's a free market plus the governing framework to run it. Free markets do not, for example, work to everyone's favor if some people have insider information, which gives them a trading advantage. This is why we have laws against that. Free markets also work badly if one single company dominates a market sector and can use their power to force customers to stick with them. This is why we have laws against that. And free markets also don't automatically account for externalities, such as environmental pollution. An externality is generally
negative externality. There's a distinction between negative externality and positive externalities is fine. Negative externalities, like a positive externality is like, you have more, back to my original example, you have more farmers producing food, and so the cost of food goes down, and so famines go down. So a third party positive, like an externality, is like a third party benefiting or being hurt by that. So farmers producing more, prices going down, people, famines going down. Like positive externality is, oh yeah, less famine. That means maybe there's less war. Okay, that's a positive externality. Negative externality is, okay, they're producing more food. It's getting cheaper, but they're using chemicals to do that, and those chemicals are getting into the water. So this third party over here, they're drinking that water and they're getting poisoned. They're getting cancer. That's a negative externality. So she needs to make the distinction of negative externality versus positive externality. But yeah, pollution is the most common negative externality that I brought up to my students.
Any consequence of trade that doesn't directly affect the trading parties. They can be both good and bad, but it's the bad ones that are the problem. Suppose there's a river going by your house that everyone is free to use. One day a clothing company puts up a factory and dumps their toxic waste into the river. Or the fish die and no one dares swimming in the river anymore. This is clearly not an optimal use of resources, you might say. Why didn't Smith's invisible hand prevent it? The reason market forces didn't prevent it is that the water was free to use. The market.
It's a tragedy of the commons. The classic problem of tragedy of the commons. So you overuse a finite resource, and it's a free resource. So you got there's free water everywhere, but then it ends up one company driven by or motivated to make money using it all up, and then it screws over everyone. It's a metaphor, but I think it's a good way to kind of it's not an easy. I mean, this is why we have this concept of public goods. It's free to all, and if one group tries to make it a commodity, commoditize. What's the word? Make it a commodity. Then that's when governments step in and say, "No, you can't do that." Although, we have bottled water, but that's amazing that we have bottled water to this day. Well, they say, oh, they improve it, they filter it, and they do all these things to it. They make it convenient by putting in these little packages. It's annoying still. I get it.
Didn't know it had any value, so pollution couldn't reduce its value. There are several ways to deal with problems like this. One is to just pass laws that forbid certain actions and punish those who disobey. Or you can put a tax on the pollution so that at least the government has money to clear up the mess. Or you can put a price on using the water. There are pros and cons to all of those, but that's a different story. The story for today is that we have
5 times she said it's a different story.
Known that externalities can lead to market failures since the middle of the last century. Carbon dioxide emissions are such an externality. For the market to optimize the use of fossil fuel resources, we should have put a price on releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
Carbon tax, FTW. I actually am a fan of a carbon tax. I think that should have been the way they went. 40 years ago, they should have done that. I know, controversial. It's still controversial, but I'm telling you, it would have. Anytime a company hurts society, it's proven they hurt society, then I'm okay with that kind of tax. They're also called sin taxes. You have taxes on cigarettes, millions of people dying from lung cancer, alcohol, basically any drug, because it hurts society, so tax it. Also a good way to bring in revenue. Anyway, I digress.
We did not, and that's why we're now in deep shit. So yes, our current capitalist systems do have a problem with environmental protection, but the reason isn't that there's something wrong with capitalism per se.
Oh, of course they would just transfer the cost to us, of course. But there are other ways that we get screwed over by companies raising prices. They do this regardless, okay? They would always look for excuses. Now, profit margins is something we should pay much more attention to. If a company makes 75% profit versus another company that makes 10% profit, maybe we should recognize that maybe the company that is only making 10% profit each year is more ethical. We should support that company. We should support the company that treats its workers better. As a consumer, I think we should do a better job at paying attention to these type of things. Um, Oftentimes, though, I think companies rely on consumers being ignorant, and that's kind of how they get away with driving up prices. But yeah, that is a concern. They will, but I mean, you could say the same thing about any tax, any type of tax. We have to tax, so it's always about what's the least bad way to tax. Land value tax. There we go. Now we're talking. Now we're talking. We got a Georgist in the audience.
It's that we didn't set it up correctly in the first place. Basically, the origin of the problem is that no one paid attention to economists. And unfortunately, we still don't pay enough attention to economists. The current situation is that companies who voluntarily produce environmentally friendly goods put themselves at a competitive disadvantage because other companies exploit the environment at zero cost. This moves the burden onto the consumer. If you want to buy a climate friendly product today, you face extra costs because fossil fuels are cheap and getting to net zero is not. This makes no economic sense and it'll ultimately not work. It's completely upside down. Products whose production causes damage to the environment, which then requires adaptation and mitigation, should be more expensive, not less expensive. This is why economists have argued for decades that we need to put a price on carbon, and it's why several countries have now introduced carbon taxes or use a cap and trade system.
And they're smart for doing that. And the economists are right. So she's right with this point. However, I think how she's framed this whole thing is problematic. We'll get to that here at the end, but just know that there are parts of this video where I'm just like, okay, she's not saying anything controversial.
To calculate the cost of carbon emissions, one basically needs to evaluate the damage the emissions would cause in the future and then put a price on them. It's called the social cost of carbon.
Yep.
There's a long debate about just exactly how to calculate this, but that's another story. At the moment, carbon taxes and trading schemes only apply to about a quarter of all emissions, and the price of carbon is almost certainly still too low, but it's a step in the right direction. In summary, capitalism has been incredibly successful in advancing society. To the extent that it has caused us problems, it's because we haven't properly used it. The solution is not to abandon it, but to make sure it works to our advantage. There's no simple way to do that, and everyone who claims that the solution is to either discard capitalism or blindly trust it didn't understand the problem in the first place. Microeconomics and financial modeling is completely fascinating. It's basically the mathematics that rules the world. If you want to learn more about how it works, our sponsor Brilliant can help you with this. Brilliant.
Interesting. Okay, so that's the video. Yeah, I don't like the way she framed this video. There are problems for sure. So I can understand somebody watching who is not a fan of capitalism itself, watching this and just like, that's it? Because there are lots of people, and I imagine lots of her subscribers, lots of her viewers, who think that the problem isn't unfettered capitalism. The problem is capitalism itself. The system itself is inherently bad. It is evil. The system is evil and needs to be gone. To those people, I can sympathize. I get it because look at the world we're living in. Capitalism has not solved all of our problems. In some instances, in many instances, actually, it has made problems worse. So there are good arguments to that. What my counter to that always is like, it's the best system we have that we know about so far. So let's just work with what we've got. So I have a more pragmatic viewpoint of it. Like, it's obviously not going to solve all the problems we have, but the other counter I have is like, when we think about what capitalism is, what we actually see play out in the real world isn't truly capitalism. We have, I think, state capitalism is a good way to kind of characterize a lot of it, but even that's oversimplification. Somebody in the comments here said, yeah, Cool Banana 69 said, well, the problem with our current investment system is that companies are far more incentivized to make their investors happy. So that's how it's currently designed. I have a whole video about corporate welfare. This is the same, lots of overlap here, because the system is designed to basically make it so the people in power, they're listening to these large companies and their investors more than anyone else. They care about these large companies and investors, these giant multinational corporations. That's who they listen to by far. And as long as that's happening, then we can't expect true. I mean, think about starting a small business. It is very difficult to start a small business. It shouldn't be. It should be easy. Like every small town in rural America has a Dollar General, a Family Dollar, or Dollar Tree, which I think Dollar Tree, Family Dollar are now owned by the same corporation. All the mom and pop shops, all the small businesses have been driven out. These small towns in rural America are dying. And yet that's like, oh, well, that's capitalism. No, what we have is a situation where one company has a monopoly. They are too powerful and they lobby the government. They get candidates elected that will help them out. I mean, this is corporate welfare that's destroying rural America. But back to the video, I mean, you know, she's framing it as if capitalism itself is 100% good. That's not a good way to frame it. You have to frame it in terms of like, okay, it's our least bad option in terms of all the economic systems. Feudalism is horrible. Communism has not, we're not ready for communism. We probably won't be ready for communism for generations. Like this is a utopian dream. Socialism even, I don't think we're ready for that either. If you look at what's been the most successful in terms of economic systems, it's been a mixed economies. Typically, like in terms of political systems, they call it social democracies are usually the most effective. That's really what Bernie Sanders is. He's a social democrat. He's not a socialist. And they all are very capitalistic countries, okay? A country where you have, like Denmark is always the example, but really it could be South Korea. We compare North Korea, South Korea. South Korea essentially is also has a social democracy, and it's thriving. It's has one of the highest standards of living in the world. I mean, are they really happy there? You know, it's such a materialistic society. You could say the same thing about the United States. Like, are we really okay? I'm talking about in terms of standard of living and time, in terms of necessities, where there's an abundance of stuff to a point where we don't have to worry about necessities. Now, housing, we kind of screwed that up. I mean, almost everywhere screwed that up. Not the Scandinavian countries, not a lot of the Asian countries don't deal with this problem. But here in North America, yeah, we screwed that up. But no, that's again, like if you have a social democracy, a lot of those housing issues will go away as well, because you'd have much more public investment into housing. So I think ultimately it's not, I think it's foolish just to say, oh, capitalism is wonderful. It's the best thing ever. When you should start with saying, okay, yeah, well, this is what we have. Here's how we can make it better. And I think she kind of starts to do that at the end of the video. So I don't know. All the hate towards her, just chill out. She just messed up framing the video. And she did also screw up defining what capitalism is. Kind of like a hodgepodge economics crash course. By the way, if you don't know, I've written an entire economics series for Professor Dave. All his economics videos, I wrote the scripts for. I based it off my curriculum that I built when I used to teach high school economics. So anyway, here we go again. Yes. No mentions of corporate subsidies or bailouts. Yeah, I was hoping that she would mention that. That's a big, big part of our so-called capitalist society. It's not really. It's you could say it's welfare capitalism for corporations, welfare for select few companies. Quantitative easing, yeah. Second Thoughts just released a video about quantitative easing, about the creation of money, and maybe I'll react to that next week. I haven't. I've held off because I was like, oh, maybe I'll watch it during the stream. Wealth inequality is, I think, a byproduct of those two things, aforementioned things: quantitative easing, subsidies, bailouts. Generational wealth also is something that causes wealth inequality for sure. Yeah, I mean, there's several fields within communism and socialism that it's not all utopian either. There's a lot of things that would definitely work. Oh well, thank you so much. T-Lag Pro has already checked it out. Nice, thank you for checking that out. True, and she kept saying we'll get to that in another story. So if she does release more economics videos, I guarantee you that her and her team are looking at the comments and they're going to kind of reconsider a few things. It's pretty obvious that she's German. I imagine that German is another social democratic country. And they have really good protections for workers in Germany, for example. And so, like, I know that, like, I think she's just so high on capitalism because she's seeing it, and if it's working a lot better in Germany than it is, like, say, the United States, or mainly just the United States. A few other select countries either, but I'm biased. Obviously, I'm an American. Oh, Emperor Tiger Star is here. All right. George's welfare. Everyone can get a basic house. Yeah. The more I learn about universal basic income, I'm telling you, everywhere they do it, the results are positive. The only question is, it still has yet to be done at a massive scale. Like, the biggest scale we typically see are just a few thousand people. If we can somehow get an entire country to do it over a long period of time. So Luxembourg, I'm looking at you. Maybe you should try it out. Yeah, that reminds me of that classic CGP Grey video about automation. I should go back and rewatch that. I've seen it like 3 or 4 times, but he made it many years ago now. I wonder if it's aged well. In terms of their economy, absolutely. In terms of, like, other things like civil liberties, there's a little bit less freedom there. But I think economically, I mean, if you look, Germany has the arguably best economy in Europe. It's driving the European Union. So I think I don't know. I think economically they are. Singapore, yeah, but they have some aspects that are. I mean, they don't. There's no people experiencing homelessness in Singapore at all because they provide housing for everyone. But there's a few other things that are authoritarian leaning that are problematic to me. Yeah, humans need not apply. That's the video by CGP Grey. It's a good one. It's a classic video at this point. I would say probably socialist is a good. I mean, mostly it's not 100% a socialist country. It's also state capitalist, I think, is a good way to describe it. And it's the reason why I think a lot of the wealth has been created in China is because of embracing markets, capitalism to a certain extent. We have to acknowledge that. We have to recognize that. That's also why Vietnam has been doing much better in recent decades, is because of them opening markets. So I think for those who just blindly say, "Oh, well, they're communist and they're doing just fine," that's that's a pretty like oversimplified way of looking at it. That again is mixing political systems and economic systems. Definitely Emperor Tiger Star. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, the universal healthcare is pretty nice in Germany. Oh, you know what? I don't know much about their energy policies, so I'll have to research that more. You could be right on that. Yes, quick question, Big Ben. I mean, not. I guess at the smaller scale, yeah, you could say that like a worker-owned company too is basically a socialist idea. Yeah, you can make that argument. Yeah, that's pretty much it, Brando. It's a command economy. Wait a second. Oh. It's a command economy when it comes to certain markets. All right. Well, it is. It has been about an hour here, and I'm still not in my new studio. I don't know when it's going to be done. It was supposed to be done by now, but anyway, we'll see how it goes this week. I can't wait to move into it. You probably heard some banging in the background. There's my house is actually still being worked on that I'm in. So exciting times for the future of Beat Productions LLC. Thank you for being here. We do this every Monday at 9 a.m. Central. I react to a video. I have several lined up thanks to your suggestions and also recommendations from the algorithms. So thank you, YouTube algorithms. I might just go ahead and react to that second thought video next week. The new studio is where the Georgist Revolution begins. I love it. Well, glad you thought so, T-Leg Pro. I appreciate all the kind words. You're a great audience. And yeah, spread the word. If you have a video you want to recommend to me to react to, I prefer it be American history, economics, or geography. If it's not one of those three, then I'm not as much of an expert. I'm not an expert at anything really. So I'd be reacting to it, and I probably wouldn't have much of value to add to it. So anyway, yes, thank you so much for being here. Have a great week, everyone.